More people are applying to law school. If you're among those applying now or in the near future, you're going to love today's show. Brigitte Suhr, accepted law school admissions consultant and former application reader for UVA Law, is going to reveal what she looked for in evaluating law school applications and provide advice on how you can include those elements in your law school application. Welcome to the 330th episode of Admissions Straight Talk, Accepted's podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. I'm Linda Abraham, the founder of Accepted and the host of this podcast. My mission and passion is to help you show that you both fit in at your target schools and are a standout in the applicant pool. The result, you get a message one day that causes you to jump up and down shouting, "Yes, I'm in!" Not only in, but in the best program for you. I'd like to introduce the featured resource for today's podcast. That's Accepted's Guide, the Law School Admissions Guide, 8 Tips for Success. Download this free guide and learn how to apply successfully to law school. We'll link to the guide in the show notes at accepted.com/330. Our guest today, Brigitte Suhr, earned her BA from UT Austin and her JD from UVA. She then went on to travel the world as an international lawyer, working for Human Rights Watch, the International Criminal Court, and other foundations and NGOs. For approximately 2 years prior to joining Accepted, Brigitte worked as an application reader for her alma mater, UVA School of Law, and in that capacity reviewed over 2,500 applications. She was the one recommending, admit, or deny. Let's find out why she made those recommendations. Brigitte, welcome to Admissions Straight Talk.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great. We're happy to have you. Now, you've had a fascinating career working in international law and human rights law all around the world. Why did you decide to become an application reader at UVA?
So I had worked for so many years at the international level, and I needed to step back briefly for family reasons. So when I was ready to come back, I started a consulting company on my own, working with nonprofits and foundations. And as I was building that up, it took me a little while. As I was building that up, I had the opportunity through conversations to work with UVA, and I thought it sounded like fun and opportunity to get back in touch with my alma mater. So I took it. And then now I'm busier on that end. So I wasn't able to give UVA my full commitment, but I didn't want to leave admissions completely behind. So that's how I came to be admissions counselor.
Okay, great. We're glad you did. Now, when you were reviewing applications for UVA Law, did you have a particular bucket of applicants that you reviewed?
I typically reviewed those that were either below median in both GPA and LSAT, or above in one and somewhat significantly below in the other.
Wow. Okay. When the numbers were below, what made you decide to say yes?
That's when other factors really come in. The personal statement becomes really important. Also, the reasons why. Why was the GPA low? There could be a good reason. Has sufficient time passed, or that particular problem had been solved? Do they otherwise convince me and the rest of the committee that they are capable of doing well in law school and being a good lawyer? And that's where all of those other factors come into play to outweigh the one thing they have against them, or typically one, but sometimes more than one thing that they have kind of against them.
Okay. When you went through an application, how did you go through it? I mean, you already knew the people were somewhat behind the 8 ball because they were going to you, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, sort of, or some of them. But then when you think of a school that's as selective as UVA, it didn't really take that much to be in my pile because the medians are so high. Right. You could literally have, you could be at the top of the heap with either GPA or LSAT and then still be in the 90th percentile and you'd still be in my pile. So it wasn't, so these weren't, it was a big range of candidates, including extremely well qualified ones and ones that were, definitely at the lower end. But so it was really a big range of candidates. In terms of what I would do is I just read it from top to bottom. And
so what's the top? What was the top for you?
However it comes to me from the LSAC. So
Okay,
I
so
think
we
it's
start with personal information and
personal information. I think pretty early on for the UVA version was the activities and service. Um, and that was an important one for UVA. I think not every law school requires that. Gosh, now you're asking me to remember what I used to do, but and just whatever order it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was then, like the personal statement, everything but the transcripts and the LORs, if I'm not mistaken. And then the second attachment had those items. So there I am creating my impression based off their own reporting, their own writing, their addenda, if any, and then I would have a pretty good idea formed, and then I would go to the LORs. That was the way I did it.
okay. So as you were, I mean, you hinted at this a minute ago, but could you be a little bit more specific in terms of what like, let's say for a personal statement, what made you say this personal statement, even though their stats are low, I really have to consider this person seriously. Let me dive into the activities more. What made the activities say, I really got to read that personal statement very closely because this person looks really interesting, much more interesting than the stats.
Right. So I think there's so many different ways that could happen, but a personal statement could really capture my attention if it were either a really interesting story or extremely well written, or both. And there are the few that are both, that really just take your breath away, both in subject matter and in form. Sometimes it was less that it was something completely groundbreaking that they had to say, but it was extremely well written, and you can tell that this person is a good writer, observant, astute, and likely to do well in law school just off the basis of a really well written personal statement. Other times, either the personal statement or the addenda really put into light the why of, let's say it was a low GPA. Well, maybe 5 years have passed, they've proved, maybe they got addiction help, or maybe whatever was ailing them at the time in undergrad, they show that they've overcome that. They have some kind of work history to also show that they've overcome that. Then I'm really willing to put that GPA into context. That works best if you do have a way to show that you've truly overcome it.
Of course, yeah, for sure. And what about, were you ever suspicious, like you read an essay and you wondered, did this person really write it?
Sometimes if there's a concern, there's always the law school, the LSAT writing sample. So sometimes we would go back to compare that if it just seemed too distinct or didn't somehow gel with the rest of the application. So yeah, that would happen on occasion.
What about, I mean, if somebody has, I'm sure you read plenty of addenda, right? That's the kind of the classic way an applicant would address a low GPA or even a low LSAT score, which I think in general is harder to address. Yeah. What made for a good one? Let's take first the low GPA. What made for a good addenda?
Yeah, the low GPA, I think some of the issues that I previously alluded to, like, was something going on in that young person's life? Sometimes it's an eating disorder or mental illness or undiagnosed ADD or a parental situation or, abusive. I mean, there's so many different things. These are young people. These are kids kind of, almost on their own for the first time, typically, not always. And so things do happen. And the ones where these are significant enough, they write about them persuasively. And like I say, there's some way to show that that's no longer dragging that person down. Even the addiction thing. I mean, I know that can be tricky because addictions can relapse, et cetera. But I read some very, very convincing addenda or personal statement, because it depends on the approach the person takes, where I thought, this person owns it, shows that it's behind them, and shows that they didn't live up to their potential for a real reason, and now is probably, willing and able to do so. So those are the kinds of things that I think work.
What makes for a bad addendum?
I'm talking GPA still?
Yeah.
Sure.
We'll get to the LSAT in a minute.
Yeah, a bad one, usually they weren't terrible. I did have a couple terrible ones that I really thought, oh Lord, they should have not done one at all. Well, typically, I think if you're above the median, you should probably not do one. Don't point out the one bad grade, even if you're above median, because nobody's going to notice that or particularly care. At least I certainly didn't.
What if it's an F?
I'm sorry?
What if it's an F?
Yeah, possibly, especially if you can say, and then I retook it and I got an A or, or B.
Right.
Yes, it would be rare that you have straight A's and an F and you get, so you're above median at a highly selective school.
Right.
But yes, if you're talking, different ranking school, maybe the GPA is a little lower. Yeah, you've got an F or two. You might want to say something. I think an F is worth explaining.
Yeah,
I was more in the context of a C. It may not be one individual.
Right, especially in your freshman year.
Yeah. Those were also good ones where there really was an upward trend by going back to that. If you could show that, freshman year was just tough, but every single semester you just went up and up and up, I think that's useful as well. We can see that with our own eyes when we assess the transcript, but that might be worth saying.
Right. And the bad addenda, what, again, I don't think I quite heard that.
Yeah, you blame the professor, you blame someone else, you're just not taking responsibility for the GPA. The ones that also weren't great were the ones where, I was partying too much and didn't take my college degree seriously. I probably could intuit that from the grades, but I don't know if those were that useful, And
how about the ones where the ones I love are, I was so busy with extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
I was volunteering. I learned so much. I had so much great responsibility. I just didn't have time for my classes.
Yeah, probably not the best approach in law school. Now, if they did that and then showed a great couple years of work history, great LORs around their work, yes, we know kids are young. They do unwise things from time to time, and it's fine as long as there's something to kind of convince us that that's behind them.
I think there's also a difference if somebody says, I learned a lot from my community service activities, but I did not manage my time well, and I did not give my classes the attention I should have. And since then, I've learned my lesson. I've done, X, Y, and Z. I had a great work record, whatever. Rather than I do it all over again, because I was so involved. That's
a couple people do that, and I would do it again because it was so valuable. I don't know. I mean, if you're going to be in school and you're going to be in law school, you've got to do well. So it's probably worth pointing that out. Sometimes it's also employment. They had to work 40 hours.
That's something else.
That's significant. That means something. That's something worth writing about. If you can say that you don't have to work in law school, then that's a good thing to include because it is hard to work in law school and especially a lot. Some law schools don't even allow it for the first year. And certainly many do. But yeah, there are ways to point out as long as you're pointing out how you're no longer doing that same thing.
Right.
That's helpful. Yeah.
And taking responsibility.
Yeah.
What about addenda for below median LSAT? Do they ever work, or is it just retake it?
I mean, as you pointed out, that those are much harder to get to have something worth saying. Every once in a while, if a student points out their below median SAT, but then they went to a highly selective college, did very well. Again, LSAT's maybe not representative of their abilities, and they believe they can do just as well as they did in undergrad. That's worth saying to me. And also, but that only works if you have a high GPA.
Right.
If you have a low SAT and a low LSAT and a low GPA, not really very convincing.
No, everything adds up.
Everything adds up, and how's that going to then be different? But I did see a number of them where that the GPA was very high, and so that worked for me. That made me take a close look.
How about academic infractions or criminal record? Did those come to you also?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that was part of the whole package. I saw the addenda. Again, a huge range of what works and what doesn't work. I think, and I saw, just the ones where I thought, wow, this person, if you ever have this problem, this is how you talk about it, because it was perfect. And then others were like, oh, just please don't have said that to me right now.
That's right.
I think that minor infractions are not that significant unless there's a
minor meaning like a DUI.
Well, I think more like traffic and a candle in the dorm and a beer in the dorm and that kind of stuff. Those, what I consider those minor. DUI is more serious. Still, I think if there's just the one in your entire life, and mind you, some people apply older, and of course they have more tickets and maybe more opportunity. But still, yeah, that's more serious. But just the one, I guess different people have different theories. I think shoplifting was a heartbreaking one for me when I read them, but I think there's a huge difference between a 13-year-old and a 22-year-old who shoplift.
Right.
So again, context, detail, and how you approach it are very, very important. Anything violent is a toughie, yes. I think. But one of my favorite addenda ever was, just a drunken, violent mistake. And one time in the entire career, I get that. I get that sometimes, people do deserve a second chance. It's just, again, context and detail that matters.
Okay. How should people from well-represented or perhaps overrepresented groups write a diversity statement? Or should they, if it's not required?
I think it depends on the actual prompt. And some law schools, they don't, the prompt disallows that. And other law schools, it's more open. Mm-hmm. I think it depends on what you have to say and how you say it, once again. I've read some very interesting diversity statements from non-underrepresented minorities. It's highlighting something you bring to the classroom. And that can be a large range of things. Or if a personal experience causes you to see the world in a distinct way, that can also be interesting. One thing I saw a lot, but not a lot meaning too much, was folks who were raised in dual cultures, biracial, in different ethnic culture. They have something interesting to say because they were raised, bridging two cultures, languages. Some of my favorite diversity essays were written by those students. But again, that's as much how they say it as what they're actually saying. But they're helping paint a picture of themselves, a more complete picture than just the personal statement would.
And one thing we haven't touched on at all, you have the personal statement, you have potentially addenda, you might have a diversity essay. How should they all fit together? I mean, I think you raise a really good point right now that, it's how they kind of all play together in the sandbox.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary to write the optional addenda if it repeats what's in your personal statement. So if you decide to write your personal statement about what arguably could have been a diversity statement, then don't do a diversity statement. It was, even sort of annoying sometimes when I was reading the same information more than once. I don't need it because it's not like I'm saying, oh, diversity statement check mark 2 points. That's not what I'm doing. If that information was already in the personal statement, then you've got that covered. There's no point in doing one.
Would it be wise though to kind of, as an applicant, to sit back before they start working on their application and say, okay, I'm going to address the diversity element in the diversity statement. I can highlight something different in the personal statement, and yes. I can highlight something else in an addendum.
Yes. However, I would say that there were times when I remember there's not a million times, but several times that were memorable to me where after reading the personal statement and the diversity statement, I thought the diversity statement was much better and should have been the personal statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, but yes, do the personal statement you want to do. That's your primary, and do whatever you want to do. If you still have something left to say about your diversity statement, or sometimes the GPA addendum is already covered in your personal statement. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you want to cover it really specifically. There's ways to do it, but maybe start with what you really want to say in your personal statement.
Okay, great. Did you like to see a sense of direction in the applicants somewhere in the application? In other words, did you like it if they said, I want to go to law school in order to pursue this kind of career? I want to go into politics. I want to be a corporate attorney. I want to be an international lawyer, fighting for human rights. I want to work in public law or criminal law. Was that important to you at all? Did you want to see some affinity for UVA, the fact that they weren't just looking at US News, but they'd actually looked at what the program is? Did that matter to you as when you were reviewing applications?
Both of those mattered to me, in differing ways. I think a why law makes sense for most people too. Somehow, you want the reader to come away from your application knowing why you're applying to law school. And it doesn't have, sometimes it's, I'm going to law school because blah, 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 or within your personal statement, you kind of lead to that. That's fine, especially if your resume does not read law. If you were chemistry major and you went and did a little cancer research, and then now all of a sudden you're applying to law school, you may have a really good reason, but I really want to know what it is in those cases, because that bridge has to be built for me. Whereas if, it's that classic, I was on the newspaper and I was pre-law society and I did, the judicial board of the interfraternity council and I did 15 pre-law classes. Okay, I get it. He wants to be a lawyer. It may be somewhat less important for him to explain that. Although, and I also don't think you don't have to say exactly what you want to do. If you know, you shouldn't hide the ball.
Right.
But if you don't know, that's okay too. But some plausible reason why you're going to law school.
I think there should be, some. When I was in college, it was very often said that law school is a good foundation. But law school was much less expensive then.
Yeah.
Much, much less expensive.
Yeah.
So it never had to say what it was a foundation for. It was just a good foundation. It could be a foundation for a practice of law, it could be a foundation for business, could be a foundation for whatever. But the truth is that law school is a great foundation for the practice of law, and maybe not the best foundation for the practice for business. It's not a bad one, but it's a very expensive one.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's true anymore. I don't think the idea that law school is just a good education, again, it's just too expensive for that.
Yeah.
What do you think now? You were a law school applicant at one time. You were a lawyer, practicing attorney. You've been an application reader. You're now a consultant at Accepted. What do you think that law school applicants frequently just don't understand about the law school admissions process that they really need to grasp before they enter the application process?
I think that it's something that takes time and needs attention on each of the primary pieces of the application. Usually when you're applying for law school, your GPA piece is reasonably set, although you might be applying in your senior year. Think about how your LSAT piece looks. Is it all you want it to be? If it isn't, can you take it again? If it is, great. Move to the, kind of each piece matters, and what can you do to maximize each bucket or each bowl or however you want to put that. And to also maybe think about the whole. So it's each of those pieces, but then it's also the whole. What am I saying? What am I leaving out? And I think the time piece is important. I did not realize that until I started working at UVA, that with the whole rolling admissions, it does make sense to apply early. It also makes sense to start early, even if you're not going to apply that early, because
it takes time.
It takes time, and it's not the easiest thing to do. It's personal, it's critical, it's this, it's that. And so if you're doing that on top of just absolutely rushing to the deadline, I gotta believe it's much less fun. And it's maybe never truly fun, but you can at least take it and let it sit and pick it up again if you start early.
Right, and I think quality suffers if you rush it.
That's right. I mean, I definitely had a few that I thought, boy, that essay seems like it was written in about 35 minutes. And, they were not the best ones. Yeah.
Right. I probably mentioned some of the mistakes, but what are the other common mistakes to avoid in law school applications?
Yeah, I think some of them are the kind of careless errors of, typos, bad spelling, bad grammar, repetitiveness. I think coming off attitudinal surprisingly does happen sometimes, where I just don't think, there was one example at UVA where, because they do ask for that activities and service or something like that, and most kids duly fill it out. And there was one applicant who just like took a principled issue with the question.
Oh.
Boy, I'm not sure that makes sense to to doubt the question rather than just answer it. So
he felt it was not a legitimate question.
I'm sorry.
He doubted the legitimacy of the question. Like, why is this part of the application? Huh?
Yeah, why do you care? Or why are you pressuring me to have done something besides go to school? It was very strange. But those are small things. Sometimes the wrong essay's attached. And that's why I want to go to Duke. And it's really for you. We get it. People are people. They make mistakes. But it's not your best look. No. It's not like I immediately said deny, but it's not your best look. What else? Yeah, just the kind of the repetitiveness, and have other people, I don't know. I can't think of any other particular examples now, but there were definitely a lot of the mistakes that should have been caught.
Did you ever get essays where applicants were trying to, let's say, elicit pity and didn't really need it? Did you ever get that? Or that's more younger?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really tricky question, because I think stories of overcoming hardship are compelling.
Absolutely.
They're not the only way to be compelling, of course, and not everyone's overcome hardship. It's not like that's required for law school. But if you have a story like that, it can be extremely effective to tell it, and to tell it well. You don't want to wallow kind of in the pity or poor me thing. I didn't really notice that as much. Maybe it is an age thing, a maturity thing. I didn't notice that as much, but trying to put it into the lesson, or what good came out of it is for me important as far as a narrative storytelling piece. But then I also checked that instinct of mine, because this is a traumatic story someone's telling me. I don't need to impose on them the obligation to make it, a Hollywood ending, right? So while I had that impulse, I wanted it, I also actively checked that a little bit.
I also think it's important when you're writing about a traumatic experience, that you want to portray yourself as having come out stronger.
Yes.
You don't want to portray yourself as damaged goods.
No, you ideally you don't, but it's also, just psychologically speaking, not that I know this professionally, but I just think that it is a process, and people don't always come out perfectly either. So
no,
to the applicants who have lived through very, very difficult things. But yes, as far as like, if you can do it, does it make the reader feel better about who you are and where you are and your abilities? If you can somehow put it in a positive, or so that you've learned something or coming out stronger, yes, it does. I mean, I had some that I would, without revealing the name, would read to my children at dinner, because they were just incredible stories. I could not believe the level of loss and pain and trauma some young people live through. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, I've had those stories and experiences also. And some people, no question, are damaged, but some people also rise above it, and those are the ones that are most memorable. And then I think a graduate school, whatever it be, whether it be law school, business school, medical school, knows these people have a lot of backbone. Yeah. And that the resilience that they've demonstrated, they can draw on in the future, if hopefully not to the same extent, but if need be.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would have liked me to ask you?
Oh, we covered so much. Yeah, you asked me and I didn't get to the answer about kind of the why X law school. Right. I thought those were really useful if they were reasonably well done and sincere and researched. If you put 2 lines in there where you may as well just cut and paste any first name. It's not that, it doesn't really help you that much. I don't think it's required by any stretch because we're smart enough to know also that people can Google and research and come up with a decently written paragraph. How deep is that commitment? Who knows? So it's not that it's required, but I did like them. And I had a couple, again, breathtakingly amazing ones that I would really reference in my summary. And others, I would always say if they had a nice, reasonably decent to well-written one, I would always make a note of it. So I think it's probably worth doing, in particular for the schools that you care deeply about and have something to say about them.
Okay, great. Any last minute words of advice?
Start early, be thoughtful, be careful.
Okay, sounds good. Brigitte, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Listener, if you would like to learn more about Brigitte or work with her on your law school application, we're going to include links to her bio in the show notes at accepted.com/330, as well as to her contact page so you can reach out to her directly. I want to thank you, listener, also for joining Brigitte Suhr and me for our 330th episode. If you find the show worthwhile, I have a suggestion for you. Subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our future shows, whether with admissions directors, test prep pro, former admissions directors, or alumni doing great things. You can find subscribe links in the show notes at, you guessed it, accepted.com/330. Quick reminder, download your free copy of the Law School Admissions Guide, 8 Tips for Success, at Accepted 330. Thanks again for coming. This is Admissions Straight Talk, produced by Accepted, and I am your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again next week.